All right. Good evening, everyone, and thank you to everyone who's here joining us today. My name is Lisa Partida with Home Again LA, and today we have Tom Fuentes with Banc of California. Today's topic is going to be making housing decisions. So whether you're thinking about renting, becoming an owner, take a listen. So we'll go ahead and pass it along to Tom.
Thank you, Lisa. So yeah, today is making housing decisions. What are my options? So we're going to identify what you need for your current housing situation, and we're going to talk about key factors in deciding whether renting or buying is a better option for you, and identifying housing options and how to make those choices. So here's our key takeaway. We're going to discuss how to figure out what you need and what want in a place to call home, and talk about options for housing. What types of housing there are will help prioritize your options, and start by defining what safe and secure housing means to you. So first, we'll talk about safety and security. Then we'll consider what else you'll need in making your housing decisions. Safe and secure um, mean different things to different people. It's really going to be dependent upon your current situation. So here's a renting and buying matrix uh, that you can use to go over which option would be better, and what you should consider when you're thinking about whether or not you want to rent or buy. So some of these things and some of these key factors are going to be, um, as you can see here at the top, how old you are, what age you are currently. Um, it's also going to be factored on um, the current market conditions uh, that are happening at the moment. Right now, we're in a up market where prices are considerably higher. One of the key factors that we can think about right now is the interest rate that are on mortgages right now. Interest rates are historically currently high. I want to say that we're between something like 6 and 7% for a standard 30-year fixed mortgage. Something else to consider in buying or renting, for that matter, is whether or not any improvements need to be made on the place that you're going to be living. Is it going to cost you money uh, to either redo the kitchen or the bathroom, paint, do maintenance? Do you need a new air conditioning unit if you're buying a house? Um, if you're renting, you can throw in improvements in considering whether or not you have to furnish your rental. Do you have a couch? Do you have a dining room table? So on and so forth. Other factors for renting and for buying are what the neighborhood is like. And going back to the safety and security thing, when talking about the neighborhood is not only dependent upon safety and security, but do you have kids? What's the school district like, for example? Those are things that you need to consider whether you're renting or buying. The other thing to factor in is the location. If you're buying a house, there's going to be certain locations where the property taxes are higher. Location can also be dependent upon factors related to location can also be based on whether the type of insurance that's going to be required for your location. I'll give you an example. Do you live close to the foothills or for the mountains? Certain locations like that would require fire insurance, for example. Other things to consider are amenities and accessibility options as well. You can think about a rental uh, being, do you want a community pool, a community center? Uh, does it have a gym on premises? Things like that. And then condition can also be related to whether or not improvements would have to be made. Other thing I would fall into condition on renting or buying is, how old is the unit that you're considering? Um, do you really want to buy a house that was built in 1950, for example, or rent from an apartment complex that was built in the 80s, for example? Do you want something newer? So you can identify important factors in housing decisions in the participant guide. After we go through, you'll see that there's going to be sections here that you can fill out on your own after you understand a little bit more about the key factors that we're going to talk about in the workshop. Yeah, so look at some options for renting, right? So the apply it include items to watch out for in each of these options, and also some key criteria to think about for each option. We're not going to go over all of it right now, but um, one of the things is that you can rent a room in an apartment or a home. This is a room that's yours to use generally, like a bedroom. You may rent one room. Do you have use of the kitchen, for example, in the living room or common spaces? So that's one thing. Maybe you rent a room. This is something that my youngest daughter did when she went off to college. She rented a room and had access to the common spaces within the apartment or the home that she was in, actually. You can rent an apartment. This is a room or a group of rooms owned by someone else, right? So you're renting that space from them. You can rent the unit. This can also be considered a condominium as well. You can rent a house also, and remember the house is owned by someone else, and you're renting to have uh, use of the house, right? There's also public housing. Public housing is a decent and safe housing option, and you may fit within the income criteria because there's often um, options for those folks who may be considered like lower moderate income that would be income dependent based on that type of housing as well. Options for buying may include a single family house, a modular home, or a townhome. Each are good options. Things to consider when purchasing a home with these three being the options. Uh, Often a condo is part of a larger property complex and can often be associated with the homeowners association fee, which can be an added cost to your mortgage. Um, Same can be considered for a townhome. Something considering when you're purchasing a modular home would be the fact that under most circumstances, the land is not something that you own. While you're buying the modular home itself, you have to pay rent or a land lease agreement based on someone else owning the land, where that's not something that would be typical in a single family house. And this would also be considered under the manufacturer mobile home category, where you can purchase the home, but you are renting the land. So that's just a really quick section. Again, I would consider going back to the apply it section and going over the situation with, I forget the person's name in the situation, but Trisha, and whether or not renting or buying is good. But yeah, so those are kind of the key factors for that. I think one of the most important things to consider is what you can actually afford. Making sure that you have an affordable payment for housing is probably the most important thing that you're going to have to consider based on a monthly basis. So only one can decide what's affordable to you. It's going to be based upon your own current situation. Remember that landlords and mortgage lenders cannot tell you what is affordable to you. Sure, you're going to go ahead and apply for a mortgage loan, and they're going to give you things like debt to income ratio or a front end ratio, which is a housing income ratio based on your income on a monthly basis. But really, it's going to come down to what you think you can afford. And again, in the participant guide is a scenario with Pat and Sam where you're given their income and what they can afford monthly. Feel free to look at that. Um, in the scenario with Pat and Sam, there's a method one of figuring out what their affordability is. Method one takes the annual gross income and multiplies it by 3 to estimate the highest home purchase that they can afford. So the annual gross income is what you make each year before any taxes or deductions. Um, so you can look at their annual gross income of 48,000. So in this simple formula, we would multiply it by three, and we would find that Pat and Sam could afford a house that's 144,000. Of course, this is small numbers to keep the math simple. Where now I think the median home price in Los Angeles County, for example, is something in the realm of $600,000 to $700,000. But you can see that this is kind of an easy way that you can calculate house affordability. Method two where method one replies on the annual, this method replies on the monthly. So method two multiplies monthly gross income by 0.3. It's effectively the same thing. Monthly housing costs include rent, mortgage payments, plus required insurance, utilities, maintenance, and repairs. So it's based on the traditional rule that monthly housing expenses should not exceed more than 30% of your gross monthly income, right? So let's look at this in effect. So if the annual gross income is 48,000, we're going to divide that by 12 months in the year and realize that their affordability on a monthly basis is $4,000. We're then going to multiply that by 0.3 because remember, we don't want the housing costs to be more than 30%. And that we can see now on a monthly basis that they can afford $1,200 a month, where we could see this annualized at 144,000. This is taking that number on a monthly basis. Third method, you can look at your monthly income and expenses to estimate an affordable housing payment. So you add up your income, subtract your non-housing expenses, and see what's left over. So for Pat and Sam, let's see what we have here. So, sorry, I got to move this real quick. I can't. Okay, here we go. So the monthly amount's 3,500, 4,200 divided by 12. So their total net income is 3,500. And then we see here their total non-housing expenses are 2,360. So we then take their total net income and we subtract it by the non-housing expenses, which means that they only have $1,140 left over for their housing costs. So you can see, yeah. So here's another scenario that you can see in the participant guide of the different method calculations and what you can apply for your own circumstances. So yeah, so this is the key takeaway in section 2 is the affordability payment. Let's reiterate here. Method 1 is going to be that method annualized for the whole year. Method 2 considers what you can afford on a monthly basis. The key takeaway with method 2 is that traditionally we don't want you to spend more than 30% on your housing costs. And then method 3 considers non-housing costs and will then take your total income and subtract it by non-housing expenses to see what you have left over for housing costs. So key takeaway in section 2 is understanding the 3 different methods that you can go about. I would recommend doing all 3 for your current situation because it's more telling effectively for the most part. So what's next if you decide to rent? So we're going to discuss steps renting, reading and understanding a rental agreement or lease, and getting renter's insurance, and the rights and responsibilities that you have as a renter. So the key takeaway from this section, ways to protect yourself as a renter include reading and understanding your rental agreement or lease agreement, and getting renter's insurance and knowing rights and responsibilities. So really quick steps to renting right. So there are steps you can take to ensure that you're renting a place that's right for you. So figure out where you want to live, right? We kind of already talked about this already. Figure out what kind of place you want to rent. And that could go for, do you want it to be a house, a condo, a townhouse, stuff like that, or even a room for that matter, right? Figure out what you can afford. You can use the same scenarios that we use in the method calculations as well. Understand how credit is going to affect the decision, whether or not you have a credit score, and what type of credit score you would need to effectively get that unit. Research the many options that are out there. You utilize web searches to an example of this would be like use apartments.com compared to Redfin compared to Zillow to find your best option. Get your first month's rent and deposit together because you're going to have to put down uh, a deposit in order to rent. Uh, Read and understand the lease and rental agreement to know what you're getting into, right? So we'll go over the first bullet point, which is find out where you want to live, right? Prioritize safety and security. What's important for you? Is public transportation even available in this location that you're looking for? Do you have a car? If you don't have a car, do you need a bus? Do you need public transit in the way of light rail, for example? Is there a subway nearby? Stuff like that. The distance to work, childcare, medical services, things like that. How far away are you living from your family, for example? We already talked about this, but what's the school district look like? Is there access to greenways, parks, and playgrounds? Accessibility features for persons that have disabilities is something to consider as well. And then anything else that may not be here that may be important to you as well. And again, in the participant guide, you can use this scenario to figure out, based on housing options, what would be best for your current situation. So step 3, figure out what you can afford. And in the participant guide here, you can use the apply it to figure out what it is that you can afford. And it'll be the same calculation that we did for the section 2 takeaway, right? Step 4 is understanding the type of credit that you're going to need in order to get a rental. So landlords are likely going to look at your credit report. So realize that you're able to get one free credit report every 12 months. You can go to annualcreditreport.com to get it. You don't have to pay for it. Know what your credit score is before applying. Low credit scores may have negative information on your credit report. So spend time looking at it. Make sure that there's no errors on it, right? Be prepared to spend more time looking for an apartment if you have a low credit score. You may have fewer choices of apartments based on a low credit score. You may have to pay a larger deposit if you have a lower credit score. You may end up having to pay more rent and may need to find roommates to live with you to absorb some of that extra cost too. And you may have to reconsider the decision altogether of whether or not you can actually afford the rental. So search the internet. We already talked about this. There's online sites like apartments.com, Zillow, Redfin. I'm sure there's others that I'm not thinking of that you could use to cross compare different options. The other option, I guess, too, you could use a real estate agent. I don't know how typical this is for a rental. I mean, you maybe if it's a different type of lease agreement that you're looking to get, maybe, yeah. So that could be an option. I don't know if that would be necessary because you'd have to pay real estate folks commissions when they're involved. So I don't know if that's for the best. Get your first month's rent together, right? So deposits. So you generally have to pay the first month's rent up front before you move in. So you may also need to pay a security deposit before you move in. So you may have to do both, right? So how much can you afford to pay in that scenario as well? Some rentals may also require an amount equal to the last month's rent before you move in. It's kind of state dependent. Like I said before, make sure you read the rental and lease agreement so that you can see if there's any other upfront fees that may be a part of it. And then you also would have to prove that you've purchased rental insurance for the unit. So yeah, read and understand the lease agreement. The lease or rental agreement is the agreement between you and the landlord or the property owner. So it's very important that you read the agreement so that you understand everything about it. In the participant guide, we have an example here of things that can help you understand reading the agreement. So feel free to check out that in the participant guide. There's a cool checklist that you can go through in the participant guide that takes about 5 minutes to go through. It's going to talk about who are the parties to the lease, like who's on the lease agreement, where the property is, what parts of the property you have access to. When's the rent due? That's an important one, right? When is the rent due? What is considered late rent as well? How long is the lease for, right? Typically 6 to 12 months, but know it as it is expressed in a date from this date to this date. Okay, and then any other rules that may be applicable, like are you allowed to have guests over, kind of things like that too. Renter's insurance, right? Another way to protect yourself is getting renter's insurance. So if something bad happens, like a fire or theft, you can afford to, replace your personal property. If a visitor were injured at your residence, could you afford to pay the expenses if you didn't have insurance if they were injured, right? So renter's insurance helps you financially recover from losses from personal possessions or a hazard or a disaster that may happen. Hazards and disasters that insurance recover are known as named perils. Um, this can include fire, vandalism, theft, explosion, tornado, like a storm, water damage, things like that. Uh, Renter's insurance doesn't cover the physical building. You don't need to worry about that. That's on the property owner. Renter's insurance can protect you also um, on claims if someone's injured who's visiting you as well. Uh, you can also buy additional insurance on top of it. Renter's insurance may also cover additional living expenses if you were unable to live in your rented home because of a named peril covered by your policy, for example. Some landlords will require that tenants purchase renter's insurance even if they don't want to purchase it. Kind of similar to when you drive a car, you have to have car insurance. But you have rights as a renter as well. So the Fair Housing Act is the federal law that protects you from discrimination when renting, buying, or securing financing for a house. The Fair Housing Act prohibits housing discrimination based on race, color, national origin, religion, sex, disability, and presence of children. You have the right to housing that meets health and safety codes as well. For example, the roof shouldn't leak, plumbing should work, and there shouldn't be exposed wires, for example. A resident with a disability is permitted by federal law to make and pay for reasonable modifications to the interior of the apartment unit. Reasonable modification is a structural modification made to allow people with disabilities the full access and enjoyment of the facilities. Housing providers are required by federal law to make reasonable accommodations for people with disabilities. A reasonable accommodation is a change in rules, policy, practices, or services that a person with a disability will have an equal opportunity to use and enjoy the common space. An example is providing a reserved parking space near the building's entrance. All rights come with responsibilities and things that you must do too, though. For example, you have the right to electricity in your apartment. If you, however, are responsible for paying the electric bill and you don't, then your electricity can be paid off or turned off, excuse me. So most states and cities have laws and ordinances that provide additional rights to you for housing. Yeah, so just visit HUD. Is it on here? HUD.gov. Yeah, here it is. So if you think that your rights have been violated, you can go to the Department of Housing and Urban Development website at www.hud.gov. Navigate to the section for renters, links to the general and state specific information. In this case, we're in California, so you go to the California tab, and it'll show you everything related to the laws in California as is considered for HUD. You can also consult your local public housing authority, a HUD-approved housing counseling agency, or a legal services organization for more information. Yeah, so there's several ways to protect yourself as a renter, including reading and understanding the rental agreement, having the option to buy, or you may not even have the option, you may have to based on your landlord, buying rental insurance. And then again, knowing your rights and responsibilities as it's outlined based on HUD, based on reasonable accommodations if you have a disability, or as stipulated under the Fair Housing Act, which prohibits discrimination based on these items here. So we actually kind of got through that a little fast. Um, so yeah, that's knowing uh, different, making housing decisions based on whether or not you're going to rent or buy. Yeah, a little fast, but effective, I think, right?
I'm having technical
Oh, I
difficulty
hear
trying to
you.
unmute myself,
I hear you.
but thank you so much for the presentation. Well, I guess, does anybody have any questions or anything? Oh, we just have a comment. Good information. All right.
Thanks. Yeah, I think the biggest thing for this one, for me, is understanding the affordability portion, whether you're renting or buying, and using the three methods to calculate the affordability annualized, the affordability on a monthly basis, and then the affordability when calculating non-housing items
Right.
as it affects your income. And then the other portion of it that's probably the biggest takeaway would be understanding your rights, right? Under the Fair Housing Act, visiting
Mm-hmm.
the HUD website to figure out what the laws are regulated by the state that you're living in. Um, and yeah, so tons of different decisions on whether or not you can rent or buy. Um,
Another good resource for learning your rights as a tenant, or housing rights, is housingrightcenter.org. So I just put it in the chat for you guys. If you guys want more information, just visit their website. And that's also very helpful as well too. They have workshops as well. So um, I definitely encourage people to go and check that out as well.
nice.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, Tom, for coming on tonight. And thank you so much for your time. Thank you, Arlene, for making it to the session.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
All
you,
right.
guys.
Bye. Bye.
All right. Have a good night.
You too. Bye.
Bye.